So it's like, how do you build something that's enduring? These people do build like a very tightly scoped product. And then it's like, okay, you might have success with this, but at the end of the day, we have to build, like a VC-backed company.
I call it like the paper cut of hesitation. It's like every time you see something that's slightly off, it's like there's a hesitation there. It's like, ugh.
It's so easy now to get something spun up and running if you know just a little bit about code. There is like a lower barrier to entry of like creating a product. Like you'll put a chatbot in front of a user, but they won't know the best way to actually leverage the system to get the information they need out of it.
We're going to see within the next like 5 to 7 years the rise of B-school programs that have hybrid OMOR and AI, Gen AI degrees.
LLMs are kind of even leveling the playing field a little bit more between like experienced engineers and non-experienced engineers.
Mark Zuckerberg recently went on record saying he foresees, this year LLMs being able to replace mid-level engineers. Hello and welcome to Beminists Speak Out, a new series hosted by BEM AI. My name is Jenny Kwan. I am one of the founding engineers here at BEM. I have with me here today our wonderful friend and partner, Erica Clark, who is co-founder and CTO at Riveter.
Hi, great to meet you.
Yeah, great to meet you. Thank you so very much for taking the time to join us here for this conversation.
Of course. Super excited to chat about all things AI and startups.
Yes, absolutely. So why don't we just kind of like jump in and talk about what, the respective, like our perspective on our respective value props and kind of like heart of philosophy. So tell me and everyone else who here is listening about Riveter.
Yeah. So Riveter I started a couple months ago with my co-founder, and we're currently building a tool to help bring AI into non-technical workflows, non-technical data-heavy workflows. So if someone's like processing lots of data and they need to apply or like process and enrich every row, we help do that, and we support a multitude of use cases, mostly in marketing right now.
Wonderful. Yeah. And just so that like, I'd love to like include for our listeners and viewers, some like high level understanding of like what kind of workflows are you trying to empower and for what kind of outcomes for your marketing audience?
Commonly, like our users will have like a lot of data that they buy about their competitors or about like other products in the market. And so we're helping like further enrich those data points that they have. So for example, one of our customers is using us right now to pull a bunch of products on their competitors, and they need additional product information so they can calculate and compare prices against their competitors.
And I'll just kind of jump in and talk a little bit about them. If you are a first-time listener or viewer of this podcast, then you should know that BEM is the place to go for infrastructure for data entry and EDI. What we basically do is we support operational workflows that companies have. These are the kinds of workflows that are already specified in code and actually running on machines. And at the edges of that, typically, those kinds of workflows need data to support them. This includes the kind of like, if you were to kick off, let's say, a reimbursement process at a health insurer, you would need to do a bunch of data entry to get your claims information in there. What we do and support instead is, hey, just upload your PDF of your physician statement, and all of that data is pulled out and funneled into the processes without the friction of machine-to-machine EDI, as well as without the friction of requiring manual data entry. And so one of the things that I was kind of reflecting on and preparing for this conversation with you, Erica, is reflecting on like the commonalities. So on the surface, right, like when I think of BEM, I think of operational use cases for things that are live customer facing business processes, right? Like those kinds of workflows. And it seems like what you're doing at Riveter is more to enable business intelligence or competitive intelligence research Is there anything that you'd like to add in terms of what it is that you're really looking to support in terms of workflows and user experiences for your customers?
Totally. Like one of the main things that really drew us to this idea initially is like there's a lot of tools that help like engineers help structure data and like process data. And like if you're an engineer, it's really easy to work with large amounts of data and like enrich or process it. But with AI, there's a lot of things that non-technical users also now have access to. However, there still is kind of a gap in like the tooling that non-technical users can leverage to like really work with these data heavy workflows. Like if you were to try to put all of the data into ChatGPT, and many times the data that our customers are working with are like hundreds of thousands of rows, it's just the context window is not large enough to actually be able to process all of it. And so it's a lot of work for them to then chunk it up and then send it to ChatGPT, whereas like an engineer would have no problem with a task like that. So really what we want to do is we want to build a really solid user experience that even non-technical users find it very approachable.
I recently saw, a big demo of the Riveter product. And thank you so much for taking the time to show me. Really impressed with the UX and workflow work. And it seems like you have some really strong opinions on how to guide, let's say, a marketing user through the process of enrichment and collection of these publicly available data points. What's been the process like for you of actually like formulating those UX and workflow opinions and actually executing on them?
I think what helps is my co-founder is non-technical and she's worked with some AI products. And so her and I just have like very different understandings of like what the top technology can do and seeing where she'll stumble with some other technology products or like other vendors that we've used has actually been very insightful, where it's like, okay, these are like the common points that a non-technical user may not fully understand, or like a lot of non-technical users will have some understanding of like how to prompt a system, but usually the depth only goes so deep. And I think like a lot of problems with AI tools today are like you'll put a chatbot in front of a user but they won't know the best way to actually leverage the system to get the information they need out of it. Like potentially they're not providing enough context, or like potentially they're not providing like examples to the system. And so they're not actually getting like great responses. And so building like more guardrails into the product to train users on like how best to work with AI, like that's something that we think is going to be the benefit of our product.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those guardrails, I think that's a great word. I personally think of them as like, what are the creative constraints that actually like empower efficiency, right? Like the default interaction model for LLMs, of course, is just text. And so, you go in there and the problem with text, and this is something that we've discussed internally here at them a bunch, is the drawback of text and conversational text is kind of this like low fidelity specification.
Yeah, totally.
And that low fidelity specification really requires, augmenting with some structured input. And part of, what I was impressed with the demo was actually seeing and framing like, hey, this is actually a guided experience to say like, this is how to think about enriching with adding fields or updating fields. These are things that are, if you actually build user experience in front end around, right? You actually get much more precision in very low efforts, like this low effort precision, which I think is the key. Like we all want precision on these processes, but the work to actually make it very precise is something that is unreachable for a non-technical user.
Totally. Yeah. And like, especially if you haven't been so immersed in AI, it can be really unclear of like, what are all the levers you can pull to actually make this better, especially when it is so vague as like all that you're working with and all that you have to work with is just text.
And that kind of raises the question. One of the things that we kind of like really are struggling with as a market opportunity here at HEPM is thinking about how to drive quality. And so I kind of want to just kind of pivot to that topic specifically in thinking about the quality of the data that you are pulling in to enrich your customers' data sets. Um, what, uh, yeah, what has that quality improvement process looked like for your customers and prospects?
So the question is like, how do we make sure what we're pulling in is good?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, I mean, one of the big things that I'll usually do when working with like LLMs is I'll instruct the LLM to like, if it doesn't know the answer, don't return something. Like that's one of the big, like first guardrails I usually always put in place when working with an LLM. So that's definitely something we do. We haven't dove into this problem like too much just yet because we're still in like the very early phases. We're like building prototypes, building tools that we can work with to like help service our customers. And we'll be launching in probably the next couple weeks to like more actual like beta users. But we have a couple ideas of like how could we actually like surface like if this result is a result that we trust and like have high confidence in, or if this result was like a little bit more of a guess or like even a calculation that the LLM did. That's something we're thinking about, but we don't have like an exact answer on like how we might actually solve that yet.
Yeah, yeah. We're, I think, in a similar spot where, I think of them a little bit further along in the life cycle, but still quite early, very early. And the question of quality and like, there's the, asking an LLM to check itself or using a second LLM as a judge, right? Those kinds of approaches. We've been batting around like, what is it to bring classical ML statistical measures into this problem, clustering classification, in a way that is more than just like, working with a vector database for RAG, right? Or embeddings, right? And in that, um, it's something that is, we question how much of it to expose the user, because one of the things with when we say like technical versus non-technical, it's like technical in different ways, right? Like there are some ops people who are deeply technical in process engineering, they're just not coders.
Yeah, sure.
Right. And so in thinking about things like confidence and things like rates of groundedness and accuracy and precision and the various kinds of ways in which you could measure quality, how do you think about expressing that back to the user to guide them in the right behavior to get the product to actually, do the right thing?
That's a great question because we've thought about a couple things here. Like we kind of want to take a more educational approach where we also like, see what somebody actually inputs as like prompt to the AI and actually like probably have another LLM review the prompt and be like, hey, here's some suggestions on like what could be better. Here's some things you might be missing. Add additional fields. So it's like they could add an example if they want to make it very clear, like an example might help the LLM like know exactly what to output. We also have been thinking about like after the LLM processes all the results, can we actually go back and like flag results that seem inaccurate or seem like they're like just incorrect? And so then the user can review, maybe update their prompt, maybe rerun. And then so several options like that. I think the challenge is that people if you don't have like these quality controls in place, people just begin to trust the product a lot less. Like because then they're like, oh, every result, even if it's like one result out of 100, if they find that one result that is bad, they will just assume like, oh, I can't trust the other 99 of these results. Yeah. So yeah, being able to flag and be like, this looks wonky, and then guiding the user to like how to fix it. Like, oh, maybe you should like add this to the prompt. Like that's something we're definitely thinking about because I think AI tools really need to build a lot of trust right now with their users.
Yeah, yeah. It's something that we talk a lot about, again, internally about like onboarding process and what it takes to especially in an operational use case, right? Like hit this minimum quality bar to actually put something in production. And for us, that process is something that it raises kind of two sets of questions. One is, okay, if we, let's say, only show the user the things we have low confidence about for corrections, will they get the impression that they have to correct a whole bunch of stuff and actually, 95% of the time, everything sails through with high quality and they're just not seeing the high quality? Do they get caught up with, I have my own pet term for this. I call it like the paper cut of hesitation. It's like every time you see something that's slightly off, it's like there's a hesitation there. It's like, ugh. And you build up enough of those and you just like get this muscle memory of like, when I interact with this thing, I have to double check myself. I have to hesitate. And therefore it's not trustworthy, regardless of what the numbers are.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think in with other tools I've worked with in the past, I felt like not being transparent of like, oh, this isn't something we have as much confidence in, just made everything else feel like they couldn't trust it. And so this is kind of something we're going to play around with. Like, if we are more open about like, oh, this is our actual confidence level, will customers be more open to like, okay, I only have to look at these, I can trust everything else?
Given that, I'd like to pivot and just talk about AI as a space generally, right? Like with that as a lead in, right? Like we're in a brave new world,
Yes.
right? With all of this, like LLMs are of course brand new. The market's moving very quickly. The technology is advancing very, very fast. Foundation models are coming hot and heavy. And in all of this, we don't yet as a society have some kind of pre-existing ways of interacting with these components, with these system components, which is really what they are, right? Like yes, they can talk at us, but that's not the same as a reasoning human, right? And
Totally.
so to interact with these things, like how do we actually think about, in the absence of that pre-existing culture of people like growing up with LLMs yet, right? How do you actually onboard someone and get someone to convert from prospect to customer for an LLM-centric product that you're building?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think right now we're still so early that we're looking at a lot of we're looking for early adopters, basically. So a lot of people that we're selling to, like, they are interested in using a lot of the new technology. And then also the need that they have is burning enough that they're willing to try these other solutions. Like, I think one thing that we're trying to do too is like, and have kind of explored as we're like, have explored solutions, is like, we need work that sucks so much that people don't want to do it themselves, that they're willing to take a bet on this new technology.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Have you found any, in talking with customers, prospects, have you found any pushback on the types of interaction models that you're putting out there in kind of your experiments in finding, product market fit?
We've definitely come across some skepticism with AI. Like, I think there's a lot of concerns around like, what are you doing with this data? Like, will the model then keep my data and then continue to train on it? There's also concerns like we talked about around like the ability to trust models, especially given, like, I think a lot of people's knowledge of LLMs are still even a couple models out of date. And so there used to be a lot more hallucinations like a couple models ago. So yeah, those are the two that we're mostly running into, but we haven't tried to sell to like really large enterprises or anything just yet.
We've been really fortunate in that, like, it seems like for BEM we have, thankfully, great inbound and great funnel for us, with a whole bunch of use cases that feel like it's picking off low-hanging fruit from the marketplace.
Oh, great.
Which is really, really positive sign. It's not, because it's low-hanging fruit, it's not defensible. Yeah. Right. But like in the ramp up, like we need the cash flow and we need the proof points to secure further funding and all of those concerns. But it's been really cool to be able to capture that where we're starting to meet a bit of friction with prospects are those who are a little more skeptical, or have, even if they're looking for let's say massive cost or expense reduction in switching from manual data entry to agentic AI data entry, right? In that transition, if we can't actually provide statistics around confidence and accuracy and precision and recall and those kinds of things, the deal is just not, doable. And that's something that I feel like kind of AI across the industry, across the space, we just have not built up that muscle around how to think statistically and data in a actually data-driven way about outcomes.
Yeah. I mean, that makes so much sense. Like, I think anyone who's going to purchase a solution, they want to understand the ROI. And so, yeah, I think so much of the AI industry right now is still selling to like a lot of early adopters, and it hasn't fully penetrated many markets yet.
One of my kind of observations about this is like, when people think about trust, right? Like there's like either I have a track record or there's some sort of social proof. If I got to see for myself, either I experience for myself and get some sort of muscle memory from interacting with you directly, right? Or I'm going to actually do things by the numbers. And, let's say I am actually like deeply data literate. I will actually look at success rates and confidence intervals and those kinds of things, right? But I think one thing that's really driving adoption of LLMs is that they actually speak natural language. So it feels like this like human-like process of coming to trust someone. It's like, what is it to meet someone for a conversation, press their flesh, and actually, feel familiar and comfortable. And that is very different. That level of familiarity and comfort to drive, like, let's say, a conversation type flow is very different than competitive and business intelligence, data enrichment. It's very different than driving operational outcomes. I haven't heard many people in the space talk about that specific aspect of what it is to kind of gain trust outside of the familiarity of a conversation, kind of driving that trust building. Does that make sense?
Like, how do we build trust with these systems, especially like the more chatbot oriented systems?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because one thing that's interesting is I find sometimes when I'm interacting with the like actual chatbots, like if I'm like trying to call a leasing office or something, it's very limited in what they can actually do. And so that in a way also I feel like can deteriorate trust when it's like I actually have something I really need solved, and all I'm getting is this chatbot that can only take me in one of three directions.
And I guess that kind of segues into something that's been burning on my mind, is thinking about, we talk about agentic AI, and of course, what sets agentic AI apart from LLMs? Agents are not isolated in the world where they just have access to their own training data and they just have access to the conversation at hand, right? Like they can go off and search the web, they could do, reach out and do those kinds of things. In that, there's some sort of interaction with the outside world. And in that interaction with the outside world, it's either a high stakes interaction with the outside world or a low stakes one. And the low stakes one is like, hey, I do a web search. Obviously, I burn some energy or some dollars doing a web search. I signal to someone that I'm interested in a topic and there's some, potential loss of privacy there. But like the consequences and the cost of that action is very low, versus what is it to get agents to a point where we can actually unlock and allow agents to do high stakes actions.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting because I think that it'll still be a long ways away. Like if a human makes mistakes, people understand that and they'll be more forgiving. But I think because we've had like these deterministic systems for so long, people don't expect computers to make as many mistakes. Whereas like with LLMs, like there's a lot more variability in terms of like the outcomes that you're going to get. And I think people are holding LLMs and agents to like a lot higher bar than you would a person, which in a way is kind of understandable at the same time. So I think And I think what we're seeing with agents right now is that I don't think that they actually perform that well if they are given just like unbounded ability to do any, like a ton of different things. Like I think when they are confined to like smaller scopes of what they can actually do, I think that's where we're seeing a lot more success with agents. And so like, just searching the web, it's like they're able to yield better results than if they're given like tons of different abilities. So I think, yeah, there needs to be more trust there. Maybe one thing that they could use too is like better fallback flows to be like, okay, I'm going through this high stakes action, but I got to a point where I can't figure out, or my SOP says I need to flag this to a human, so now I bring a human involved. Like I think finding, like, for any action LLM takes, like a human will ultimately probably still have to be responsible for it. So allowing the human some way to intervene, like that might also be like a great way to build trust with these systems.
Yeah, yeah. It's fascinating to me, right? Like so much of the value prop of LLMs is that it is kind of, you can get an output with very low fidelity specification, right? Like you can go to Midjourney, put in a sentence and get something.
Yeah.
Right. But what it is to actually dial into something precise is this amorphous process right now that we don't actually have really like trainable, guidable, in a very real sense, programmable LLMs. Not really.
Totally. Yeah. I think it's funny you say that because I definitely try to play the game of like, how little context can I give to get a good outcome? Because like, I know that if I like, especially when I'm coding and like using these LLM tools, I know it's like if I give a lot of context about what I really wanted to do and like lay out, like, here's the pseudocode, go build this, um, it will probably be able to follow that and give me a really good outcome. But I'm like, no, let me just give like 1 or 2 lines and see how good it'll do. And then I'll fix it from there.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Which, just as like a quick aside, I've fallen in love with Cursor.
Cursor's great.
Cursor's great, right? Like the IDE experience is amazing. The pace of advancement with its whatever Cursor has going on under the hood, along with the magic that is just simple Claude Sonnet 3.5, right, is absolutely amazing. It's progressing so quickly. The thing that I find interesting about it is you're in a Cursor environment, you're iterating on a code project, right? And the code project is a highly detailed, highly specified thing.
Yeah.
And so if you go to an LLM and say like, hey, I have this piece of code, or not just a single piece of code, I have an entire project's worth of code, tens of thousands of lines of code, hundreds of thousands of lines of code, it can actually say like, okay, what makes sense is to take this highly structured, highly specified, highly precise document or series of documents and actually morph it in this way to accomplish some purpose, right? That's almost the complete opposite of like the Midjourney or, some sort of AI video editing experience where like, how would you think about those kinds of workflows? Like, I'm waiting to see how Figma is going to do with, being able to take, let's say, a bunch of mock-ups, which are, specification of some sort, can actually say like, hey, for this set of markups, I want to make a modification or an edit that goes in this direction. Show me something. Yeah, it's just like so different of a problem. And I think both for BEM and for what you're doing at Riveter, we're somewhere in between there in that like growth process. Is like, again, like at the industry level, what's the betting pool on like when LLMs will actually get there to actually make this easier?
Yeah, because I think with like coding, there's at least, yeah, like you said, it's highly specified. There's in a way like even a little bit more of a right answer, especially if you were to introduce something like tests and then instruct the LLM like get the test to pass. But yeah, like the world of like generating images and like designs, like it feels a lot more like unbounded with what you can actually do.
Absolutely. So I have to ask the big question for me I'm not one of the founders here at BEM, but I am a founding engineer. I think a lot about our moat. I'm sure you're thinking a lot about what is momentum and what is eventually moat for you. Do you have any thoughts on moat in this crazy Wild West space that we live in?
Yeah, it's crazy. I feel like everyone you talk to is just like, there's no moat anymore. Like, everyone's kind of searching for this mythical moat. Well, because it's so easy now to get something spun up and running if you know just a little bit about code. And so almost anyone can build anything. And then even like collecting data sets, like it's really easy to go out and collect whatever data set you want right now. And so there is like a lower barrier to entry of like creating a product, just in general. And so I think the way I've been thinking about it is like the networks that you have with people, that's going to be hard for like AI to replace. And like deep specialized knowledge will still be very hard for someone who's like not in an industry to like really come in and spin up. And so being able to leverage those, I think will put people in like a better spot. But yeah, I think the way that we're thinking of have thought in the past about moats and defensibility are kind of going out the window.
Yeah. The way I think about it is like process engineering and ops research and ops management within specific functions and specific verticals, that kind of deep understanding of operations in some space, whether those operations are actual, like, we're talking about rolling up to the COO somewhere kind of operations, or what is the operations of sales or the operations of marketing, right? Like, yeah, the actual actions involved. That kind of deep knowledge is something that is, I'm betting on this, just hard for us collectively to train into LLMs because we actually don't have publicly available large data sets around these kind of processes. I'm kind of banking on that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like everybody knows them, but through either like learning them from existing in those environments or through talking to people in their network. And yeah, it's not like documented on the internet somewhere that an LLM can ingest.
Given that, like, are there particular steps that you're thinking of taking in terms of building up that kind of competency, core competency for you guys with regards to marketing generally or competitive intelligence? Like, how are you thinking about navigating, how much to focus on the tech and the LLM versus how much to focus on domain expertise?
Yeah, I think both are very important. Like, we definitely need to get the technology right to like, and like the user experience we're kind of seeing as like something that will really attract users to our product, hopefully. And so like those are two things that we're like, we need to get this right. However, I do think that like really defining a niche and going deep and like solving problems for a specific niche and like understanding that niche really well, building the connections within that niche, like I think that is also like a really critical piece of the puzzle. I kind of think you just have to do both to like really build a product that can survive at the end of the day. Like the models are just going to continue to get better. And so there's going to be even more things that like non-technical users can do just through like a ChatGPT like interface. So going broad doesn't feel like it actually has a ton of moat. Like we just want to zero in on a niche and be able to really build out for that niche because of that.
Yeah, yeah. There's a world in which, like, I don't know if if you have a history of looking at these kinds of spaces, but the notion of like being a solopreneur that tries to do micro SaaS or like spin something up like, hey, I've got a side gig with an AI based something, like seeing the rise of that with this great fragmentation of like, well, it's a very specifically a solution for this tiny audience that is like 0.5% of the economy kind of like play.
Yeah.
It's something that's just been really, really interesting to see play out.
Yeah, totally. I feel like the people that I've seen do this really well just are like nailing their distribution channels. Like either they're kind of like an influencer themselves and are able to like launch products and get a lot of usage right away, or they're like Nikita Beer who like knows how to make an app go viral, and then their whole business model is bent around like, or is like built around the concept of like, oh, this app will go viral, it'll be popular for several months, and then fizzle out. And then we'll build another one.
It does raise the question though of like, for those of us who are interested in the more like, what is the back end of society generally? Kind of, right? Like for us here at BEM, it's like operations. Obviously, if you're catering to businesses, whether they're SMB or enterprise, for things like competitive intelligence, like that's not the same as like a consumer usage kind of thing that is, let's say, for more entertainment value, right? Like there's something about like we're actually trying to build the economic infrastructure of society. Oh, in this, where are the opportunities? I'm curious if you have, in having gone through YC, seen either for yourselves or for those in your cohort, some of those challenges of figuring out, hey, yeah, low barrier to entry, it's easy to launch, but then like getting the expertise is difficult, and we want to we want to actually, if we're going for a B2B play, how to actually build something that's a little more enduring and a little more broadly applicable to best practice. I don't know if I expressed that well, but yeah, something along those lines.
So it's like, how do you build something that's enduring kind of at the end?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about YC is it's also so short. And so I think what also ends up happening sometimes is people do build like a very tightly scoped product. And then it's like, okay, you might have success with this, but at the end of the day, we have to build, like a VC-backed company. And so just what you have built, like, won't have a large enough market size to ultimately get to like the $1 billion valuation.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's kind of like the product I think that a lot of people end up building in YC is kind of like a launching off point. Like they usually have like a grander vision of like, here's where we could go. Like, here's other problems that our customers have that we can solve, or things that we can add on to this product. But there are definitely a lot of products that come out of YC that are just like so narrowly scoped that it's a great starting point, but like to really get to a point of providing a ton of value, like there's a lot more that usually needs to be built out.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, you kind of like start with this wedge product so that you can build these like feedback channels too with your customers. And then from there, you should hopefully be able to figure out like, what else does this customer need and what will continue to enable them to like use this product and get a lot of value out of it.
Yeah. Now, I know we kind of discussed this when we chatted earlier yesterday. I'd love to spend some time talking about the experience of being both a woman founder as well as being women in engineering. And I guess if we let's talk about the founder piece. Have you seen, either in interacting with investors or interacting with prospects and customers, or interacting with other founders, have you noticed any friction around, again, the simple experience of being a woman founder?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I feel like I'm in a lot of male dominated spaces a lot of the time, but a lot of my friends and good friends like usually tend to be women.
Yeah.
So I definitely tend to seek out the women in these environments. However, it's interesting because YC and like the founder communities, especially, like they're like 95% men. And so it was interesting being back in like this really gender skewed environment. That being said, like YC, everyone is very welcoming and like really supportive. And I think, it's really easy to still connect with those people. But I think at the end of the day, like men and women just build rapport differently. And so there definitely are some challenges where like, men will like instantly be a little bit more buddy. And then like with like a male female relationship, you're kind of just like, you're sussing it out a little bit more. Like, okay, are we like, yeah, both just taking this professionally and like trying to figure it out? Like, you invite someone to coffee and you're like, there's no undertones here, right? I don't know. Just so real. So there's definitely a little bit of that. And I think also with, I mean, I think with investors, like I think everyone, I think what's hard is like just not knowing what the experience would be like if you were a man.
Mm-hmm.
What I've heard that some of the challenges are with women when they're actually going to investing is just they don't always present as like confidently as a man would. I think it's more just how women are like socialized that really like complicates things more so than the fact that like people are trying to discriminate against women, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
This is part of the, I think it's more than just gendered. It's like the bias that investors have towards moonshot ideas and moonshot people
Yeah.
is something that it has a disproportionate gender impact, right? If a lower percentage of women are just going to express themselves in a moonshot way,
Yeah.
right? But
Totally.
it that same thing is going to color along lines of, you know, socioeconomic background. It's going to color a lots of other kinds of axes of I guess both identity and background, right? I'm curious if, like, in your journey, have you felt a lot of pressure to um put forth, you know, kind of moonshot ideas with a moonshot persona?
I wouldn't say moonshot necessarily, but I definitely feel like sometimes I put on a face where it's like, um, where I just feel like, okay, I have to like feel a little bit more confident and I have to like flex a little bit more. I have to kind of like pretend like I have it all figured out. And I definitely have felt that. And that's not even when I'm necessarily a founder. It's also when I've been like an engineer, even interviewing in the past. Like I think because people are kind of attracted sometimes to like that just like overconfidence. I feel like I've definitely like played that up a little bit.
Yeah. This personally, as an engineer, drives me absolutely up the wall. Chewing. There is something about, like, so confidence, yes, but it's like, we talk about wanting to be data driven. To be data driven, I think, is to be, in a way, really subdued and sober. Like, if you really have your grasp on your data, um, the data speaks for itself, right? And it's less about oh, I show up and I convey in some like animus way, right? Like my animal magnetism says that I am super confident because I'm super confident, right? Like that drives me nuts. And all, you know, also as a hiring manager and having hired and learned my lesson there. And, you know, I personally screen for those personality characteristics of being meticulous and data driven and relying on those things rather than relying on the, you know, competence meaning competence, which obviously it, you know, doesn't necessarily.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've definitely been on interview panels too where I'm like, they seemed really confident. They got the problem and then you just assume that they can do everything.
Absolutely. Now, specifically on like the, you know, women as a women engineer, one of the things that I've run into in the circles that I run in is there's still a lot of bias around, you know, the types of engineers that are at the top of the engineering culture pecking order. And there really is like an engineering culture pecking order, right? Like,
Yes.
if you do high scale backend, if you do, let's say, kernel work, those things are seen as like actually quote unquote hard technical. If you're doing data or DevOps or front end or closer to UX, then it's like, well, you're not really one of us, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've definitely seen that too. Cause I feel like I've always described myself too as an engineer who sits a little bit more between like the non-technical and the technical. And so while I'm very technical, I'm also actually very good with the non-technical and would commonly be put in like customer calls and like I've worked on a lot of like sales deals. And so it's I see a lot of value in those soft skills as well. But I definitely have also been in these circles where you have like the extremely, like, yeah, extremely technical people. They're constantly working on infrastructure and they're like, they also kind of, yeah, like look down on front end, which tends to be a lot of women. And yeah, I mean, I don't agree with it just because I think like it's, I think that, I mean, you need both. You need people that are good at both. I don't think it makes sense to put down somebody else, especially when you yourself don't want to do that role. Like, it's actually better that they're good at like front end if you don't want to be doing front end. And so, yeah, they're kind of just going for an ego boost.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing that I have seen, and I'd love to get your take on this, is those more hardcore, more low level, like closer to the machine, scalability folks are people who are the most deeply skeptical about just how technical applied AI really is, right? Like they're not looking down on foundation model work. I mean, that's like, oh, this is deep math I don't understand. But the application of AI, including Gen AI, including LLMs, that is something that I'm seeing in in engineering culture as being something that's dismissed. Actually, I'd love to kind of get your take on this.
It's so interesting. I wonder if half the reason people think that is because there's a tendency, I mean, it's kind of like the culture of Silicon Valley, right? To like launch early. And so you do have people launching with like the bare minimum infrastructure built out around these models and around like, ChatGPT. And so they're probably, so it's easy to kind of point to the products and be like, oh, there's no technical depth here. But like to actually get a good LLM system to work, there's a huge number of technical challenges that come up, like being able to scale the number of agents that you have. Like there's a lot of like rate limiting amongst all of these different models. Like there's like something that isn't on the top of our mind is like, how do we optimize cost? Like reducing hallucinations, like LLM memory systems, like LLM tool calling. Like there's honestly a lot here. Like it's not as simple as like even just calling an LLM model, because like an agent is a whole system of like LLMs. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, like in all of this, have you, among engineer friends, gotten any kind of anti-AI backlash?
I don't have a ton, but I think right now it's because a lot of people I surround myself with are kind of like building in similar phases. And so they're all just like inundated with AI as well. And so yeah, I either have like, yeah, friends in non-technical spaces who are just adjacent to it all, or like a lot of founder friends. And honestly, in the founder circles, everyone is AI everything right now. Like people in our batch that didn't start out with AI solutions, like ended with AI solutions.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think in those circles, there's almost more pressure to use more AI and become more AI literate, because just like everyone's using AI, and all the most like cracked engineers I know are the people that know it the best. And like, yeah, so just inundated with AI.
I'm curious, what are your thoughts on kind of both as an engineer and as a founder? So I I had mentioned before in a prior conversation with you, this notion of the hobbyist programmer. So one of the things that, over the decades, over the past, let's say, 2 or 3 decades, this trope of typically a single man who spends a lot of time outside of work hobbyist programming. And out of that comes things like the open source movement, which of course is incredibly valuable for our economy, an immense contribution. But with the expertise that is gained by building things on the side on a continuous basis, being able to go from that to being a technical co-founder in some way and actually launching something like. And so I'm curious, like, are you seeing from a work-life balance perspective that same kind of tilt where it's like, in order to be up on the space as an AI company co-founder, to launch something, you have to be living and breathing AI 24/7?
Yeah, especially with the rate of development that things are coming out at. I think it's very important to stay up on a lot of the recent models. And even though it can be easy to spend so much time on like building your product that you kind of tune out everything else. But because everything's changing so fast, like it's really critical to stay up on it. And so yeah, it's like the last couple of days I've even spent time outside of like my normal work to like research DeepSeek R1 because like that could fundamentally change a lot of how we do things.
Yeah.
And it's also like very beneficial to be like, okay, how are people using this? How might it be used? Like, how might we actually implement it in our product? And so it does have the ability to make what we're building even better.
Yeah. Yeah. This like, to me, that the gendered aspect of the work-life balance that implies, right, is something that obviously, like, people often talk about the social implications, but I think, especially for our audience here, what are the implications of that for a company culture? One of the things I really value here at them is that, by and large, we're all really senior folks, and being very senior, being further along in our life trajectory and having more out of the office responsibilities.
Yeah.
And with that means that we have to figure out how to be highly efficient with our time in a way that I know I personally was not highly efficient with my time in my mid-20s, right? Let's say, right? And so that, I'm curious, like, as you're thinking about building out your company culture and thinking about the impact potentially of work-life balance on the quality and the rate and pace and momentum of your output, like, how are you kind of putting all of those pieces together?
Yeah, it's a good question. I definitely am someone who's also always had like responsibilities outside of work. And so I can't just drop all of those and work 24/7. I have a dog that I need to take for walks.
Mhm.
And so it's definitely something I think about because I also don't want to be an employer who like only brings in people who have no external responsibilities. I think one thing is it's like I can't expect the same output from my employees that I myself am putting in. Partially because they don't have the same like level of ownership or like equity in the company that I do. So it's kind of unfair for me to expect the same motivation even to work as much as I'm working.
Mhm.
So I think, yeah, like that being said, I still want people to work hard. I think like output is what really matters at the end of the day. I think to your point, it's like it's easy sometimes in the founder circles to be like, oh yeah, I'm working all the time and just kind of like be so focused on like the number of hours that you're working that you're not actually focused on like, am I doing the things that are most important right now? Like, is this actually going to move the needle? And I think when you get to a point where you're like, okay, this isn't actually the most important thing, then it's like, okay, would it actually be better to even maybe take some time to recharge than continuing to like do something just for the sake of feeling like you're working?
Yeah.
I think that's an easy trap to fall into.
Now, I'd like to kind of like just like move towards wrapping up, and let's make some space. I'm curious if you have any hot takes about the space. So a hot take of mine is that we're we're entering a phase where we have this new kind of um, system component that we can interact with to do work, right? It is having a new class of coworker, right? It's not a fellow human. It's something similar-ish, right? Like it's like having a productive pet,
Yes.
right? Like and we have to figure out how to actually organize and manage these guys. And so I think a lot about ops research, ops management, process engineering, the stats around that. Um, One of my hot takes is we're going to see within the next like 5 to 7 years the rise of B school programs that have hybrid OMOR and AI, Gen AI degrees, like specifically around like managing teams and fleets of these components.
Oh, interesting.
Like I can see Sloan being the first to kind of push something like that out.
Yeah, I mean, I could totally see it. I could see that. Like, I think even now, I see a lot of founders who will like build little LLM agents for even very small processes that they themselves have. And so I think like an ability to work with and build your own like LLMs and agents, and then an ability to like to know the other skills, like to be able to sell the product, to be able to like have these like more human soft skills. Like, I think that's kind of the future the world's going, and like will be a skill set that's very rewarded at the end of the day.
No, absolutely.
I think one hot take is I think that LLMs are kind of even leveling the playing field a little bit more between like experienced engineers and non-experienced engineers. Uh, I've seen actually, like I know it's still actually really hard right now in this economy and in this environment to like find a job right out of school, but I am finding a lot of founders are looking for people that have experience working with LLMs, and they're not finding like the more experienced engineers to be the ones that actually know how to work with these technologies. Some of them are actually going very young and like trying to hire right out of school to find people that actually know the technology really well.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me, especially in light of, you know, Mark Zuckerberg obviously recently went on record saying that he foresees, this year LLMs being able to replace mid-level engineers, right?
That's wild.
Yeah, it's wild. It's absolutely wild, which I can see where he's coming from. I actually agree on some basic level, but I feel like there's a whole other set of technical skill sets that actually doesn't account for. There's a new class of jobs that's coming that hasn't materialized yet, that isn't covered by, okay, yeah, deterministic traditional software engineering. Yes, I can see how you would replace juniors or mid-levels aggressively with LLMs.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I think in that world, there's still someone that has to write out these like really detailed specifications of what are needed and really like guide and work with the LLMs to still get like a really good solution.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cause I think, yeah, especially with like the models that seem to be able to do this more sort of complex coding, like they need like a lot more context up front than just like a couple blurbs of like what you want done.
So this is my 24th year in engineering. So been around for a bit. Having had experience at the kind of senior staff and principal level in companies, all, growth stage startups. So we're talking like, Series B, Series C onward, and not at the big boys at like Fang, but still operating at the level of like senior staff and principal. One of the things that I've noticed on those larger teams is traditionally the model for engagement for someone who's stack level is you're, as an IC, driving an initiative that you have come up with yourself. And in that, there is a lot of influence building to actually like shop around, get buy-in, not just from team leads and managers, but also try to garner interest from other teams. And this includes like this process of like recruiting seniors to actually support staff level to actually drive something forward. The thing that I've noticed that's crazy with Cursor is, holy crap, I don't have to recruit people. I mean, I can actually be singularly productive as a staff level without needing, 2 or 3 seniors and, 4 or 5 juniors rolling into a process or a project, which is just absolutely mind blowing. And I'm like, holy crap, this is like literally like, it feels like pulling the ladder up. You know that expression?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like how will people actually even enter this space in the future? Obviously they will. It'll just be very different, but yes.
Yeah. And I think we'll probably end up in a space where people won't know like a lot of the technology underneath. And so they'll end up with like a lot more shallow understanding of like how a lot of the technology works and like how a lot of like systems are built, which will probably be a little bit challenging long term.
Yeah.
And like a lot of the like really deep knowledge kind of like retires or fades out of the industry.
Yeah. Yeah. At some point, like at what point, how advanced is, or actually, let me kind of step back and rephrase this. How transformational do LLMs have to be in order to be the agent that transforms software engineering from engineering to being a trade? And the way I think about that is like, most people don't have any idea the thermodynamic characteristics of their water heater.
Yeah, totally.
Right? Like it's been componentized in a very real way. And that componentization is like, are we on the cusp of a level of componentization that actually allows us to kind of shift toward this kind of knowledge work being more of a trade and less of being, so-called engineering?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because, like, I mean, these days, so many of the websites you see these days are kind of even built with like V0 and Shad CN. So everything just even kind of looks the same, and it's like everything's using the same building blocks.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I know people that are trying to actually bring that sort of componentization even to the back end.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's been so great, chatting and getting to know more about you and about Riveter.
This was great chatting.
All right.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Thank you so much. All right. Um, I guess this is me again. My name is Jenny Kwan. I'm a founding engineer here at BEM. This is the beminists Speak Out series that is new here at BEM AI. And thank you so much for joining. And I look forward to seeing you next time.